Thanks for tuning into iCan Media. We're coming to you, of course, from the Inform Petroleum Safety Conference in Banff. One of the speakers here today was Jason Seeley. And Jason, you're with Advantage Fleet Services. Tell us a little bit about your presentation.
Well, my presentation was focused today on proving that driving is your greatest risk in life. I don't care what else you do for a living. The amount of risk that we take, and especially people in the oil and gas industry, because they're going off in the middle of nowhere, they're driving in changing conditions, they're driving around commercial vehicles. So there's a lot of risk.
So a lot of people think driving is second nature, I can do it, you know, they don't think anything about it. Is that part of the problem?
That's a big part of the problem, and what we're trying to do is change the culture of driving. We like to talk about the act versus the art. The act of driving is simple. Anybody can do it, right? I could take a group of 12-year-olds in this parking lot right now. 10 minutes, they'd all be driving. Not very well, but they'd be driving because it's simple. But it's the art of driving. And the message is so simple, which is just think about your driving while you drive.
Well, so tell us a couple of the pointers that you would have wanted the people to leave at this conference with.
I want them to know that, you know, we get in that vehicle every day, we close that door, we turn that key, and we never give a second thought to how dangerous it is. And when you drive for a living, it's just so much more so. And it just affects everybody around you. There's not just one victim in a crash. For every one victim, somebody's lost a son, a brother, a classmate, a workmate, a boyfriend, a girlfriend. So it just goes on and on and on. And we need to change that culture.
Well, and one of the things with it too, I suppose, is that you as a driver might be a great driver, but you're not the only one on the road.
Correct, and that was another point, is that everybody makes mistakes. I often ask my crowd, who's ever never made a mistake while driving? I've never had a hand come up yet. So we have to look out for the other people on the road, and it's defensive driving, knowing what's around your vehicle at all times and being prepared for somebody who makes that mistake that you're talking about.
Well, I know my years in traditional media, in television, there were stories about highway crashes. And of course, there's the highway of death in Alberta that goes up to Fort McMurray. Whenever I did stories on that, and I would talk to the RCMP and ask them, is it the road's fault, which is what people like to imply, or is it the driver's fault? It never ever came back from RCMP that it was the road's fault. It was always the driver's fault. Either they tried to pass a snowplow, or they were going too fast or inattentive. And that's something you're trying to get through to people then.
Well, it's exactly correct. And I would go so far to say there's not a highway in the developed world that's ever killed anybody. It's a cop-out, you know.
And that's part of the problem, isn't it? Because people are looking for other reasons rather than taking responsibility themselves for what may have happened.
Well, what you hear me say often is the word accident is to blame. They're not accidents. You know, somebody screwed up. With one or all the drivers involved in every crash, somebody screwed up. Did they mean to when they left the house that day? Obviously not. Did they mean to take somebody's life? Absolutely not. And yet it happens every day in this province.
One of the parts of your presentation centered around a bill that's being looked at right now. Perhaps you can tell us about it.
Well, I was talking about Bill C-45, which has actually been updated since, but it's known as the due diligence bill. And this is where organizations can actually be found criminally responsible if it's found that they're not providing a safe workplace.
So what does an organization have to do to provide a safe workplace then for a driver?
A lot of things, actually, and communication is a big one. It can't be, long gone is the day of throwing a guy a set of keys and saying, be safe. That's not good enough anymore. You know, it's got to be top down. You can't just have management, you know, spouting things at the bottom and not listening to the people at the bottom.
So how does this bill affect then? Because you say companies can be held liable. How would that come about?
Well, it would have to be from an organizational standpoint. And you and I both know that rules always matter, but when they really matter is after a crash, because now the microscope is coming out and they're looking at everything. Because it's not just a driver element. There's a shipper-receiver element, there's a maintenance element, there's a dispatching element. So was everybody in the chain doing their due diligence? And it can become vicarious liability as such.
So this is the message too that you need to get through to companies then to be aware of something like this, obviously.
I think the message is getting through based on my personal experience and what I've seen in industry. And people a lot of times will think, well, it's, you know, it's going to cost me money. Well, I would argue that it's going to save you money.
Well, you've been doing these presentations for a number of years now, talking about driver safety. What have you noticed over the time from your first presentations when you're telling people about the issues to today?
I think just the buy-in. I think people are starting to understand how dangerous driving is. And just taking that in and realizing that they can make a difference. just by watching what's around you. Again, defensive driving means always knowing what's around you on the roads. And we've all been affected by a crash. I would say that even if you weren't involved in it, you've driven by something, you've seen something you rather wouldn't have seen, and it's going to affect you. You're not human if it doesn't.
Jason, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
You've been chatting with Jason Seeley here with Advantage Fleet Services on ICANN Media.